All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Teves. Mrs. Selma Wolf for dedicating over Shimon Joshos this month with immense gratitude for the refuah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the merit of a refuah shema for all of those in need, in the schus of our brave soldiers, and in the schus of the return of our hostages. To thank Leah Sol for dedicating over Shimon Joshos this month of the schus for refuah shema for her daughter Ilana Bas Esther, for the safety of our precious soldiers, and for the safe return of each of our precious hostages to their families, Bekarov. We dedicate our learning to the soldiers who fell in battle yesterday. Captain Neria Zisk, Sergeant First Class Asaf Pinchas Tubul, and Major Devere David Fima. And of course we dedicate all of Meseches Baba Kama Le'ilui Nishmas Master Sergeant Eliyahu Michal Charush, Hashem Yikom Damo, who died protecting the Jews of Sderot. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of their neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. I will say with that, let us begin. So today's daf is Nun Vav 56, and we are picking up in Yiras Hashem on Nun Hey Amud Beis 55b. We had the great schos to begin Perak HaKones yesterday. So remember again, we actually left off in the middle of a discussion, a statement of Rabbi Lazar, who says that there are four things for which the Torah only required we'll call it a minimal level of watching, a minimal level of oversight. I'm about to say, now I just want to be clear, the terms are a little bit misleading, right? We have this concept of like Shmira Me'ula and Shmira Pechusa. So Shmira Me'ula makes sense, in other words, that's a heightened sense of guarding, heightened sense of watching, versus Shmira Pechusa, which you could kind of translate as a diminished level of watching or guarding. It doesn't really mean diminished. What it means is basic. So there are four things for which the Torah said you only need a basic amount of shmira, a basic amount of guarding, meaning it does not require a heightened level of oversight and security. Okay, so what were those four things? So the Gemara said they are bar, Eish, Shein, and Regel. So in yesterday's daf, we already went through bar. Did we go through bar? All right, let's just start with bar. So you see Tosfos Hatorah Miyata B'Shmirasa. So go right across in there, and let's begin. So bar. So the Gemara is just going to prove from Psukim how each of these things only require a basic level of shmir. So bar d'chsiv kiftach ish bar. Okiyich, the Torah says if a person will open up a bar or dig a bar, v'lo yichasenu, and he didn't cover it. So what do you see from here? Ha kiso pater. If you were to cover it, it would be pater. So what do you see here? We'll say that when you dig a bar, again I mentioned yesterday's daf, when you dig a bar, you might have thought, listen, if you dig it, what's the proper shmira? Fill it in. Right? Yet the Torah says all you have to do is what? All you have to do is cover it. So that shows you the act of covering. So this is a good way to contrast it. Right? Filling in the bar, that would be called shmira me'ula. Right? Covering the bar, that's called Shmir Pechusa. Now listen, I understand covering the bar, it absolutely does the job. But again, it's not as intense as the need to go ahead and fill it in. So that's bar. That's bar Eish. So also the pasuk says that the mavir, ultimately again the person who kindles the fire, ultimately is chayiv to go ahead and pay back the victim whose stuff was burnt. So what do you see? Ad da'avid kein mavir. Now the Torah calls the owner of the fire a mavir. Mavir means literally a person who kindles it. So you see from here, you're only liable if you act in a way as if almost as you went ahead and you actively kindled the fire, which means that your obligation vis-a-vis the fire is just to keep it minimally guarded from going out and doing damage. Shame. So we'll say, what about Shein? So Shein dichsevu bir b'stei acher. Pasuk says ultimately again, my animal goes out and goes ahead and consumes something in a different field. Ad da'avid ke'ein u'be'er. So we'll say, see from here, you're only chayiv if the animal mamish goes out and acts in a destructive fashion, which means my obligation is to ensure that my animal does not act in that way. Regel, v'shilach. Pasuk says ultimately again v'shilach, you'll send your animal to go ahead and walk in another field. Ad da'avid kein v'shilach, until you, the owner, act in a way as if you've sent the animal. In other words, Rabbi say, what all of this means is you're obligated to make sure that you don't act in these ways. Not acting in these ways is considered to be a shmira pechusa, just a minimal act or a basic act of guarding the animal from doing damage. B'tanya we learn v'shilach zeh regel. What does v'shilach mean? So shilach refers to regel. Let's remember again, what's regel? Regular damages that the animal does in the activities in the course of the activities of normal daily living. V'cheinu omer mishalchi haregel ashar v'hachamar u'beer. So we've had this before. Beer, what's beer? Zeh shein. This refers to shein. Remember again, shein refers to any damage that the animal does in the pursuit of hana. V'cheinu omer kasheyivar hagalal ad tumo. As ultimately again as the tooth destroys, when you chew something, the tooth destroys ultimately again until there is nothing left. Taima the avid ke'ein v'shilach ubier halo avid lo. So the only time you're chayiv by shein and regel is literally again if you acted in a way as if you caused the animal to intentionally damage, which means the only time you're liable is if you, the owner, did not provide a shmira pechusa, just a basic guarding of the animal. But as long as you provided a basic guarding of the animal, then even if the animal subsequently does damage, you are not liable. Rabbi says, our Mishnah seems to support this as well. Diktani son. This is interesting. Remember how does our parak start? So both say, so therefore again, this was a statement of Rabbi Lazar that halacha l'maisa, the Torah allows for basic guarding in four distinct areas: bar, eish, shar, and regel. So I'm obligated to provide minimal. Again, I hate to use the word minimal because it doesn't sound right. Basic oversight over my animal, so that my animal does not cause any of the, or my object, my bar, does not cause damage. If I provide that minimal, that basic shmira, and the damage still occurs, I'm potter. That's Rabbi Lazar's statement. So Rabbi saying, now Rabbi comes along and says, by the way, our Mishnah backs this up. How does our Mishnah back this up? It's interesting. Diktani tzon. Rabbi say, if you notice, by the way, our Mishnah says, hakonis tzon lodir. Right? We're talking about sheep. Now, why did we transition to sheep? Right? This whole Masechta, we've been talking about what? A shar. So why now suddenly are we talking about sheep? So this is very interesting. So the Gemara says, Michti b'shar kaskin, on the whole Masechta we're talking about a shar, va'asi. The asinis nishar. Why not continue on the same shar motif and write hakonis shar ladir? Why suddenly do we switch to sheep? Maishna diktani tzon. Why do we switch to tzon? La mishum datora miata bishmirasam. Rabbi say it must be because when it comes to tzon, ultimately tzon only requires a basic level of guarding. So the Gemara says, why is that? La mishum dekan karen lo ksiva ba shein v'regel hu dekasiv bei. Remember again, I will say the concept of karen, right, which remember means damage done by the aggressive behavior of an animal, is not associated with tzon. What is it associated with? Right, it's associated with the shar. So ultimately, again, therefore, tzon itself doesn't have any karen associated with it. Or what does it have associated with it? Shein and regel. Shein and regel. V'kamashmalan the shein v'regel demu adinhu shmamina. So this is really quite fascinating. So the Mishnah intentionally switches over to tzon. Why? Because Rabbi saying, remember again, tzon doesn't have karen. Right? So again, we'll say now, it's not to say that tzon can't commit an aggressive act. What it just means is that when we discuss the category of karen, ultimately, again, it's not associated with tzon. So what type of damage is associated with tzon? Shein and regel. But remember again, we've spoken about many times, wherein lies the fundamental distinction between shein and regel and karen? What's the fundamental distinction? Right? That remember again, yes, of course, there's a distinction in the types of damages, but remember the fundamental halachic distinction is that the concept of tam versus muad only applies to karen, doesn't apply to shein and regel. What's an animal's status vis-a-vis shein and regel? Muad metrila. So therefore I will say, watch this. When the Mishnah says hakonis tzon ladir, what are we talking about over here? Muad, because by shein and regel, by the way, it's not just every animal is muad for shein and regel. The point that the Mishnah is making over here is if halacha l'maisa, you have an animal that's muad, i.e. a tzon, vis-a-vis shein and regel. And what did you do? You put it in the deer. What's the deer? What's the deer? The deer ultimately is a pen. The Mishnah said, the Gemara already explained, what are the halachic specifications of that deer? What does it have to do? What does it have to conform to? Ruach Mitsuya, right? Ruach Mitsuya has to stand up against a basic one. We saw in yesterday's daf. So what does that show you? That when it comes to an animal that is muad by shein and regel, the only thing you have to do is shmira pechusa, basic guarding, and that satisfies your obligation. So Rabbi just comes along and says, Rabbi comes along and says, by the way, our Mishnah backs up this very idea, right? Inherent in our Mishnah is this concept that an animal that by shein and regel only requires a shmira pechusa, a basic guarding. Incredible. So the shein regel, the muadinu, shein regel and muad, and yet all you need is a deer that is capable of withstanding a ruach mitsuya. The Gemara says shmamina, that ultimately, again, what Rabbi Lazar said before, that shein and regel, in addition to bar and eish, only require a shmira pechusa, basic guarding. Incredible, incredible. Says the Gemara Tanya, Rabbi Yeshua, arba dvarma osa some pater b'dinei adam v'chayv b'dinei shamayim. So says another great case over here. Rabbi Yeshua says there are four things that if a person performs, a person perpetrates them, he is pater b'dinei adam. In other words, a court of law would not find him liable, but he is chayiv in the court of heaven, in the court of Kadosh Baruch. In other words, which is another way of saying something very important, which is something could technically not be illegal, but it's still wrong. It's still wrong. So 4 acts for which you cannot be made financially liable in a court of law, we'll discuss why, but yet in the eyes of the Ribono Shel Olam, you are absolutely responsible. We'll say it's a good Musar Haskell. You know, a lot of times in life, when we want to do something, so we kind of ask ourselves one question, which is it mutter or is it aser? And in our minds, if it's not aser, then by definition it's mutter. And I'll say that is not true. That is not true. There are plenty of things that are not aser, but they're still not mutter. Or better stated, they're still not good for me. And they're still not things I should be doing. This is the Ramban and Parshas Kedoshim. The Ramban says, what's the definition ultimately again of Kedoshim to you of being holy? Kadesh es atzmicha b'mashem muterlach. Sanctify yourself with the things that are permitted. Kedusha, holiness in life does not come from the avoidance of that which is aser. The avoidance of that which is prohibited is our basic responsibility. Kedusha comes by drawing your personal lines, even in the realm of that which is mutter. There are things that are permitted, but they're not good for me. There are things that are permitted, but they're not going to help advance my life agenda. Holiness comes when you draw your lines for yourself, even in the realm of that which is permitted. So therefore, again, it's interesting. Yeshua says over here, there are four things where if you're brought to a court of law, the court of law is not going to find you liable. But they're wrong. And therefore there's a responsibility in the eyes of the Ribon Shalom. What are these things? So again, Reuven has an animal he has its own in the deer. And what happens? Shimon comes along and breaks down the fence, and Reuven's animal gets out and does damage. So again, we'll discuss the parameters of this case in just a moment. So the Gemara says, that's case one. Reuven goes over to Shimon's wheat. There's a fire that's burning, and Reuven bends Shimon's wheat into the fire so that the wheat is burned. Okay. Socher edei sheker lahaid. Reuven hires false witnesses to testify. Again, we'll have to see the parameters of these cases. Or a person goes ahead and knows testimony for their friend that could benefit their friend, and they don't testify. Okay, so now let's go through each of these cases. Number one, Amar Mar. So what's the case of Osei? Right? So Reuven, right? So Shimon has an animal in a pen, and Reuven breaks down the wall. The animal gets out and goes out and does damage. So suddenly, again, now that we're saying over here, Reuven is not going to be chay b'dini adam, but he is chay b'dini shmai. So he says, "Hey, chidami, I don't say what's the case." If you want to say that the wall is a good wall, then b'dini adanami lechay. Now watch this. What's the Gemara saying? If the wall is a good wall, so forget about damages regarding the sheep. What is their liability for? The wall. In other words, Reuven, you broke down Shimon's wall. So if there's liability, so again, if it's a good wall, of course, we could debate. So remember again, we could debate whether or not Reuven should be chayiv for the damages that Shimon's animal does. After all, again, Abosai, that could easily be called the case of grama. Maybe that's Grama ben Izakin, right? And therefore, again, Grama ben Izakin is going to be pater. Okay, but Lamaisi, he destroyed a wall. He destroyed Shimon's property. So there should be liability for that. So to which the Gemara says, Ella, bosai top of Nunvav 56a, Ella, Bekolsa Ra'ua. Rather, what are we talking about over here? A rickety wall. A rickety wall. So the whole stachap of a rickety wall, it was going to come down anyway. Right? So again, therefore, in a case of a rickety wall, Lamaisa, there could be no liability. So the Gemara says, so therefore, I will say, that has to be the case. The case over here is, Reuven's going over to Shimon's property, knocking down Shimon's rickety wall, or rickety pen, right, that was going to come down anyway, and the animal gets out. So for the wall, he's not chayiv, because at the end of the day, the wall was destined to come down, and ultimately, again, for the animal going out and doing damage, bepashtas, he's not going to be liable either. Why? Grama ben Izakin. It's causation. Okay, next. Amar, Hakofe Kamasu Shachavero B'fnei Adleika. So next case was Reuven goes ahead and bends Shimon's wheat. Right, so there's a fire, and Reuven bends Shimon's wheat, and the wheat catches fire and is destroyed. So the Gemara says, what's the case? Heichi Dami. If the fire anyway was going to make it to Shimon's wheat just in the normal course of the blowing of the wind, so B'dinei Adam Namini Chayiv. So I don't understand, then he should be Chayiv. Ultimately, again, then Shimon should be chayiv for that. In other words, I will say, he actively caused damage. To which the Gemara says, "Ela dematshe beruach she'ena mitzuya." Rather, I will say, what's going on over here? It has to be so. Again, I will say, what that means is like this: if the fire was on a particular trajectory and the Ruach Mutzi would have burnt it there, and therefore, again, what ends up happening is Shimon goes ahead Reuven bends over Shimon's wheat, so that it should catch in the normal course of the fire. So therefore, again, what that means is Reuven knew what he was doing. That's called active damage. So therefore, again, it should be liable for that, even Dini Adam. Rather, it must be what? It must be the fire was on such a trajectory that it wasn't going to catch. It wasn't going to ignite Shimon's field. So what does Reuven do? He bends over the wheat. Now again, why is he bending over Shimon's wheat? Keep your hands to yourself. Okay, that's a good kasha in general, but that doesn't make you right. Being a nudnik doesn't make you chayiv for damages. So therefore, again, I will say the case over here is he was bending over the wheat, and ruach she'ena matzuya, right? An unusual wind comes along and blows the fire in that direction. So that again, the Gemara says, Reuven is not going to be responsible for. Ela demacha b'ruach she'ena matzuya. Okay, so therefore the Gemara says, Rashi said, look at Rashi's mom. B'ruach she'ena matzuya is the third line from the top. Demidi lo salka adaiti. In other words, one could say that when Reuven bent over the wheat, he had no way of knowing that the ruach matzuya was going to blow the fire in this direction, and therefore again, he's not going to be chayav b'dinei adam or b'dinei shana. I will say now, it's interesting. By the way, it's interesting because we'll have to discuss that there is another school of thought. There's a school of thought that says when you put your hands on something that does not belong to you, and then something happens, you're on the hook. You're on the hook. Again, we'll discuss, there is a school of thought like that, but what's happening over here, in this case over here, is it's true. Reuven is touching something that doesn't belong to him, but Lamaisa, he bent over the wheat for whatever the reason, and now again, an unanticipated reality set in, right? A ruach she'ena matzuya came along. So therefore, again, the Gemara is going to say he's not chayiv b'dini adam, right, in a court of law, but he will be chayiv b'dini shamayim. Okay, but Ravashi says, tamon itmar. Now, this is interesting. So Ravashi says, what's the case over here? Actually, a little bit different. Ravashi says that Reuven saw that there was a fire. So what did Reuven do? He hid Shimon's wheat. He put, you can imagine, he took like a blanket and he put it over it. Now, why did he put it over it? Why did he do that? The pashtos, he was trying to save it. Right? He saw the approaching fire. He's not able to carry out bundles and bundles of wheat, so he covers it. Now we're going to see something very interesting, which is that by Eish, there is a p'tur called tamun. Tamun says that when your fire destroys someone else's property, you're only chayiv for visible property that is destroyed. But any property that is hidden and destroyed, you're not liable for. Why is that? Again, we'll discuss. So therefore, this is interesting. So Rav Ashi understands over here that the case is actually Reuven was trying to help. Right? Reuven is trying to help. He sees a fire approaching Shimon's field. He goes in and he covers it. Therefore, again, he's going to be pater b'dinei adam. Pater b'dinei adam v'chai b'dinei Shemayim. Take a look at Rashi. Talmud Itmar. Shekisa, kamas chavero b'sadinan. Kishra deleka etzla. Reuven sees a fire approaching Shimon's property, Shimon's wheat, and he covers it with a blanket. V'hu lo shalach es ha'be'era, v'shavye tamun, v'garam lahafsid es ha'nizak, v'liftar es ha'maver. Now, both say, now watch, okay, let me see. This is actually a really fascinating case. Here's what we have. We have, right, Shimon has a field. I probably should have done the names differently, but we'll just keep it consistent now. Shimon has a field. He has wheat in it, right? So remember again, his neighbor Levi kindled the fire, okay, in his own property. Levi's fire gets out of control and begins to enter into Shimon's field. Who sees all of this? Reuven. Reuven runs into Shimon's field, and in an attempt to save Shimon's property, what does he do? He covers the wheat, thinking that somebody's going to save the property. It turns out that the entire field gets destroyed. Now I both say, now watch this. So generally, if your fire destroys a field, then what's the halacha? What's the halacha? You have to pay. Now, what ended up happening over here is that Levi is not going to be responsible for the covered wheat in Shimon's field. Why not? Because by Eish, there's a p'tur of tamun. And you're only chayiv if your Eish destroys revealed property, not destroys hidden property. So both say, so what does it turn out? It's actually fascinating. So it turns out that in Reuven's attempt to help Shimon, it turns out that now part of the damage is uncollectible because he rendered part of Shimon's property tamun, hidden, and because it's hidden, now Levi, the owner of the fire, is not going to be chayiv to pay for it. So therefore, so fascinating. So therefore, again, I will say, so it's interesting. So in Rav Ashi's model, so Reuven caused damage to Shimon by essentially making part of his lost property uncollectible from Levi. But again, in Reuven's defense, what was he trying to do? He was trying to help. But that's why the Gemara says, so he's chayiv. He's pater b'dinei adam, right? The court of law cannot find him liable, but he would be chayiv b'dinei shemayim. Quite interesting. Good. Next. Amar Mar, so we're going through the Brayso. Amar Mar, hasocher edei sheker. So remember again, you hire false witnesses. So what's the halacha once again? Pater b'dinei adam, chayiv b'dinei shemayim. Say, hey chidami, what's the case? Ilema l'nafshei. If at the end of the day you're hiring witnesses for yourself, we're talking about a case over here where Reuven says, listen, I need a little bit of help, right, in court, so I'm just going to rent some witnesses, right, who will go ahead and testify according to the version of the story that I need them to testify. Then mamona ba'ishlume. So we'll say, look, if you're hiring false witnesses, if I'm actively hiring false witnesses to provide a false narrative, so I'm chay b'dinei adam. In other words, I should be liable in a court of law. So the Gemara says, ela lechavre is interesting. Rather, what am I doing? I'm going ahead and I'm not hiring false witnesses for me. I'm hiring false witnesses for someone else. Both say a good friend is important to have, right? So Lamaisa, again, I value my friendship with Reuven. I would do anything for him. He's my best friend. I hire false witnesses for him so that he could go ahead and win his case with Shimon. So we'll say, remember again, the common denominator in all of these cases they're grama, right? They're all causation. So in this case over here, I'm doing something which results in a loss for someone else. So the might say again, I'm doing it for Reuven. Fine. But say next. The last case is I know testimony that could benefit for someone else, and I don't give it. I don't provide it. So ultimately, once again, chayiv b'dinei, pater b'dinei adam, chayiv b'dinei shemayim. So the Gemara says, my asking on what's the case? Ilema b'beit trei. So I'll say, if at the end of the day, I am part of a testimonial unit. In other words, we'll say, I, together with someone else, saw a testimony that could benefit someone, right? But ultimately, again, I don't give it. So we'll say, so in that case, again, of course I'm liable, because Lamaisa, again, I am preventing a testimonial unit from forming. So pshita daraisu, imlo yagid vinasa avono. So we'll say, so again, remember, if you know testimony and you don't give it, that's a lav daraisa. Ella bechad. Rather, what you have to say over here is, I'm not part of a set of witnesses, but rather, what am I? I'm a singular witness. I'm also saying now, remember, what's the power of a single witness? So again, now sometimes a single witness is believed, like in matters of Isser, but generally, the power of a witness ultimately is that he could force a shvuah. Right? If I show up in Beis Din and I make a claim against someone, or I give testimony, so again, that testimony is not enough to create a verdict, but that testimony could be enough to force a shvuah, to force the defendant to take an oath. Look at Rashi. El bechad shemachayv shvuah ubedinei shemayim mechayev di have a masid mechayev le shvuah v'dimul have mishtava b'shikra mishalim. I will say now. Remember again, the power of forcing an oath is that sometimes people will lie. People will lie. What are people much more reticent to do? People are much more reticent to take a false oath. So sometimes the presence even of a singular witness, ultimately again could be what decides the case in an appropriate way, because the defendant doesn't want to swear falsely. So therefore again, the Gemara says, if I am a single witness and I don't give testimony, ultimately again, I am patra b'dinei adam, but chaya b'dinei shamayim. Good. So we'll say, so these are the four cases of patra b'dinei adam, chaya b'dinei shamayim. Gemara says, v'sulaka. That's it. There's only four cases where you're patra b'dinei adam and chayv b'dinei shemayim, but we have a lot of other cases. V'ha'ika. How simulach b'meichatos or paras chatos. But we'll say, what about this? This is a great case. You guys have seen this before. We'll say, let's say again, a person has, let's say, para aduma water. Paraduma water. So we'll say the halacha is that if you do work with paraduma water, now how would you do work with paraduma water? So imagine for a moment again, I'm a shopkeeper and someone wants to come in and buy produce from me. So I put it on the scale. In order for the scale to work, what do you need? You need a countermeasure. So it just happens to be that I have in my possession, a jug of para aduma water. Again, I'm going to take it to the Beis Hamikdash, and I put it on the scale to use it as a countermeasure. Disqualified it. Mechatos or beparas chatas. Same idea. I will say, if you do work with a para aduma, ultimately again you invalidate it. So I will say, now watch this. A person who does this, ultimately again it's patra b'dinei adam v'chai b'dinei shemayim. Then I will say, why are you patra b'dinei adam? Why patra b'dinei adam? Because I will say this is a case, Rashi says over here, of hezek she'eno nicker. A lot going on today. What's hezek she'eno nicker? Unrecognizable damage. Remember again, when you look at that para aduma, or you look at the water, does it look any different? No, it looks the same. So you've damaged, but it's unrecognizable damage. So the Gemara says, we paskin hezik she'eno nicker lo shmei hezik. Unrecognizable damage is not called halachic damage. It's not called halachic damage. So the Gemara says, that's one case. So we just had this a few days ago. If you put poison in front of your friend's animal and the animal eats it, you're patra medina adam chayv b'dinei shemayim. Remember again, why is that? Because animals know what? Not to eat poison. They know not to eat poison. So therefore, again, if I put poison there, the animal eats it, I'm patra b'dinei adam chayv b'dinei shemayim. Next, va'ika. I give my fire over to a cheresh shota v'katan. That's what? Pater medine adam v'chai b'dinei shemayim. Va'iga hamavis es chavero. Suppose this is an interesting case. If you scare your friend, right? You sneak up, you scare your friend. Rashi says, like a yell in his ear, and what happens? We'll say he goes deaf. Right, he goes there for something else happens. Again, once again, why? Because it's not like I hit him in the head, right? I didn't do a physical act of damage. Again, we're going to see all these cases. I damaged him with my voice. So these are all cases of pater medine adam v'chaye b'dinei shemayim. Va'ika, another case, nishbara kado b'rshus harabim. I'm walking in Rshus harabim. I drop my jug. The jug breaks. V'lo salka, and I didn't clean up my mess. nafla gamlo v'lahamido, or my camel falls down, and ultimately again I didn't stand it up, and Abba say now someone else trips over the shard, or someone else trips over the camel, or another animal does. What's the halacha? Rabbi Meir mechayev be'ezek, and Rabbi Meir says that you're chayiv. The Chachamim pater b'dinei adam v'chayiv b'dinei shamayim. Chachamim say no, you're pater b'dinei adam, but ultimately again you're going to be chayiv b'dinei shamayim. So we'll say again, we saw this machlokes before. Again, remember again, what was this machlokes? This is the machlokes niskal poshea. When you trip over something, is tripping, the act of tripping, considered to be a negligent act or not? In other words, maybe the tripper is responsible for that. So that's the whole machlokes. They will say, what's the point? The point over here is Rabbi Yoshua introduces this entire discussion by making it sound like there are only 4 cases where you are pater b'dinei shamayim, pater b'dinei adam v'chayiv b'dinei shamayim. All the Gemara just showed is a lot of other cases. To which the Gemara says, you're right, in miha ikatuba. You're right, there are a lot of cases. V'hani itzrichalahu. But I will say, what's unique about these 4 cases is you would not have necessarily thought that they were pater medine adam and chayiv b'dinei shamayim. That's the chiddush. So in other words, there are many cases that fall under this umbrella of pater medine adam v'chayiv b'dinei shamayim, but these cases are unique. Why? Both say, watch this. Ma'odetema b'dinei shamayim nami lo l'chayiv. So both say in these 4 cases, I would have thought that they shouldn't even be chayiv b'dinei shamayim. Kamash malon, that they are. Now the Gemara is going to say, why would I have thought that they are not chayiv b'dinei shamayim? So here we go. Haporitz keder b'fnei behemas chavero. So let's go through each of the cases and discuss why you would think that they wouldn't even be chayiv. Why they wouldn't be chayiv ultimately again, even b'dinei shamayim. Here we go. Ma'adetema, kevan de la mystery koi, ma'avid b'dinei shamayim lami lechayiv. So remember again, how did we set up the case? We set up the case of paritz keder b'fnei behemas chavero. How? As a kosel ra'ua. Right? It was a wall that wall was coming down anyway. So however, if the wall was coming down anyway, then really one could make the argument that what? I didn't do anything. I didn't really do anything. Maybe I accelerated the process, but Lamaisa, the process is going to unfold with or without me. So because of that, maybe halacha Lamaisa shouldn't even be chayiv b'dinei shamayim. Kamash malo, no, you're chayiv b'dinei shamayim. So that's the novelty there. Next. Hakovev kamaso shechavero. So let's remember again. So the second case was Ruvain bends over the wheat, and again we spoke about it again. It was a case where the fire blew into Shimon's field. Ultimately, Baruch Shein Masuya. Samar like this. Ma'odetema lema mi hava yadana da'as Baruch Shein Masuya. Ultimately, again. So again, Ruvain could say, "Listen, I had no idea that a Ruach She'ena Metsuya was going to blow the wind, was going to blow the fire in this direction. In other words, how could I possibly have known that? Therefore, I should not be liable. I shouldn't be liable even b'dinei shamayim. Kamash malon, I am. Now this goes back to what we said before. So why is it that I am? Because at the end of the day, why is your hands on stuff that's not yours? Right? Lemaisa, again, it's not your wheat. So therefore, again, even though there's not going to be liability in a human court, there absolutely will be liability in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Next, Ravashi the Amar Gabi Tamon Itmar. I remember again in the Eish case, it's good Chazara. In the Eish case, Ravashi said, why is there liability? Remember again, how did Ravashi set up the case? Ravashi actually set this up as like a good Samaritan case. Ruvain sees Levi's fire entering into Shimon's field. Ruvain runs into Shimon's field, covers the wheat. Problem is everything is destroyed. But now again, Ruvain can't collect damages from Levi for anything that is covered because it falls under Tamon. So according to him, the Gemara says, Mao the Temoju have thought, Ana kisuye kisise nehelach. Because we'll say again, according to Ravashi, remember what could Ruvain claim? I was trying to help. I was really, again, here, let's say here, as opposed to all the previous cases where Ruvain knocks down the wall, right? And Ruvain, or according to the first, Ruvain bent the wheat. Here, Mamish Ruvain is just trying to help. So because I'm just trying to help, maybe Allah shouldn't even be chayiv b'dinei shamayim, kamash malon that I am. That I am. Okay. But in the case where you hire false witnesses, what would you have thought? Lema Divrei harav, divrei hatalmid mishomin, ubidini yishai nami lechayiv. This is great. See, I will say, when I hire false witnesses to testify for my friend Ruvain, right? So now I will say, maybe I shouldn't even be chayiv b'din yishai. Why? Because I should say, listen, why do you put the responsibility on me? These guys have free will, right? They have free will, and even though I'm hiring them to go ahead and testify falsely, they should realize again, divrei harav, divrei hatalmid mishomin, right? At the end of the day, right, Rabbi Gross spoke about this on Monday this year. Right, so again, at the end of the day, they know that they're not allowed to give false testimony. So why is it on me? Why is it on me? So therefore, maybe I shouldn't even be chayiv b'din shamayim. Kamash malan, no. Kamash malan, that I do have responsibility, and therefore I am chayiv b'din shamayim. Next, vayodeh eidos l'chavero ve'eino meyed lo. Last case, I know testimony from my friend, and I don't give testimony. Now, remember, how do we set that up? We set that up as a case of eid echad. Right, I'm a single witness who knows testimony, I don't give it. So the Gemara says, I am out of thought. Mao detema mi yemar dechi hava asina misahidna le hava moda dilva hava mishtabe l'shikra ubedini shamayim nami lo lechayiv. So both say this is great. Who's to say that just because I showed up and gave testimony that the defendant would admit his crime? Maybe he would just as easily what? Double down, and swear falsely. And therefore it turns out that my testimony doesn't really do anything, and therefore I shouldn't even be chayiv b'dinei shamayim, kamash malan, that I'm chayiv b'dinei shamayim. Okay, good, I will say beautiful. So that is that self-contained sugya. Four cases where you are pater b'dinei adam, chayiv b'dinei shamayim. Not to say that there are only 4 cases, as we've seen. There's many more than 4 cases, but 4 cases where one might have thought, I'm not even chayiv b'dinei shamayim, kamash malan, that I am. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Nifrat samalayla oshe pertzua listim. So let's remember again. Let's go on to the Mishnah now. Next case in the Mishnah. I put my sheep in the pen, and again, it's a proper shmira pechusa, right? So I'm providing basic oversight in guarding of the sheep. I'm doing my job. The Mishnah then said, what happened if, let's say, the pen comes down at night? Right? Through some unforeseeable circumstances. Because it's at night, also I don't see it. Or thieves break in and steal my sheep. Ultimately, again, and the sheep gets out and does damage. I'm not liable. Says the Gemara, Amar Rabba, Vahu Shechasra. What are we talking about over here? How did the sheep get out? In the case of the sheep escaping, how did it get out? Ultimately, again, it got out through tunneling. Now look at Rashi, Vahu Shechasra, Hadisna Nifrat Samalayla Pater, Kigon Shechasra Behema, Ve'pila Kosel Da'anasu. So we'll say, what are we talking about over here? So what's the case of where the pen or the wall falls down at night, and the animal gets out and does damage that I am pater? That's the animal tunneled. In other words, it dug under the wall. As a result, the wall fell down. Animal gets out, does damage. That's where I am pater. Okay, so the Gemara says, Avalo chasra, but if ultimately, again, the animal didn't dig under the wall, so my what would be the halacha? Chayiv. I would be chayiv, because I will say, remember again, the act of the animal digging under the wall, and as a result, again, the wall falling down, that's ones. That's an extenuating circumstance, and therefore, again, I am pater. If the animal got out in some other way, without digging out under the wall, then I will say that's a foreseeable circumstance, and therefore, halacha l'maisa should be chayiv. Now, what's the case? If we're talking about a wall that's totally good, in other words, intact and good, then my havidei l'mavet. I will say, then why should I be chayiv? Right? Ultimately, I'm sorry, even if the animal didn't, right? If the animal didn't tunnel, so my chayiv. How could I be chayiv? My havidei l'mavet. So in other words, I was asking, I don't understand the interface over here with tunneling or digging under, because if the wall is a proper wall, and that's what I put up to guard my animal, then what more could I have possibly have done to prevent this situation from occurring? Why should I be chayiv? Ella, we'll say first the widest line on the bottom, because rather we're talking about over here a rickety wall. So we'll say if that's the case, ki chasra on my pater. So if it's a rickety wall, so now what we're saying over here is a rickety wall, and the animal dug underneath, and the wall fell down, and the animal got out, I'm pater. Why should I be pater? Oh, we'll say, watch this. This is a case of, remember we had this before. Tchilasa b'pshia means I begin with a negligent act, but the damage is not a result of my negligence. The damage is a result, ultimately, again, of an unavoidable circumstance. So we'll say, so what's a good example of that over here, right? I put my sheep in a pen with a rickety wall. That's pshia. That's negligence, and under normal circumstances, if the wall falls down, the sheep gets out and does damage, I am liable. But that's not what happened over here. What happened over here? The sheep dug underneath the wall, caused the wall to fall down, got out and did damage. Now the act of digging under the wall, that's an ones. That's an ones. But yet, again, remember, so this case started at tchilasa b'pshia v'sofa ba'ones. So the Gemara says, Hani chalaman damar tchilasa b'pshia v'sofa ba'ones pater. So if you hold tchilasa b'pshia v'sofa ba'ones is pater, then that's fine. You can set this up as a rickety wall, but the animal gets out because it dug underneath the wall. So therefore, that's tchilasa b'pshia sofa ba'ones. If you hold that that's pater, you're fine. Elaman damar tchilasa b'pshia v'sofa ba'ones chayiv meikel mimar. But we'll say about according to the opinion that says that a case of tchilasa b'pshia v'sofa ba'ones you're going to be chayiv. Then what is there to say? Elamasnisin bekosal bari. You have to say the Mishnah is talking about a regular wall, a good wall. So what happened? Va'afilu lo chasra. Well, so we're not talking about a case where the animal dug underneath. V'chi itmar derabba asefa itmar. So maybe Rabba's case. Sefer Rabbi say ultimately again. So in a situation where, so therefore setting it up is like this. I put my sheep in a regular pen with a good wall. What happens? Somehow the wall is breached at night and the animal gets out and does damage. I'm potter. Why am I potter? I did my job. So the Gemara says, so when Rabbi talks about digging underneath, what is he referring to? The Gemara says, V'chi itmar derabba asefa itmar. So I will say Rabbi's case is talking about the end of the Mishnah. I will say, now what's the end of the Mishnah? The end of the Mishnah is if you left the animal in the sun, right, or ultimately again you gave it to a cheri shot of a cotton, and then it does damage, right, it escapes or it does damage, you're going to be liable. So the Gemara says, all right, let's analyze this. Hanicha, so the Gemara says, asefa itmar, hanicha b'chama, you're going to be chayiv in these cases. Some Rabba says, Vafilu chatra. This is true even if the animal kind of tunneled out. So the Gemara says, all right, let's analyze. So the Gemara says, Vafilu chatra, so lo mi b'hecha de lo chatra de kuli b'pshiahu. So we'll say, so certainly if the animal didn't tunnel, right, ultimately again you're going to be chayiv because it's an act of pshia. In other words, either leaving it, or let's remember again, leaving it in the sun, right, which causes the animal to kind of go crazy a little bit and do whatever it does, right, or giving it over to a cheri shot of a cotton, which means it has no oversight. Those are both cases of pshia. So the Gemara says, Ela afilu chatra nami. But even if you left it in the sun, or gave it over to a cheri shot of a cotton, and then it tunneled and got out and did damage. So the Gemara says, you might have thought that that's the case of tchilas of shev safa ba'ones, and therefore again you should be pater. Kamash walan de kula pshiahu. Both says we don't look at it like that. We look at it as a total case of pshia. Why? My taima the amarle made the yadis the chevan the shavkasa bechama called titzdaka the islay leme aved avda v'nafka. Because we'll say everyone knows that when you go ahead and you leave an animal in the sun, right? Again, without shade, the animal goes a little bit crazy. So what happens? The animal is going to do anything and everything in its power to alleviate its suffering. So because of that, nothing is off the table. Therefore, I will say that is considered to be just a blatant act of pshia. The same way that giving over your animal to a chiri shot of a cotton is an act of pshia. It's an act of negligence. Leaving your animal in the sun is also an act of negligence because everyone knows the animal behavior is such that when left in that type of situation is going to do whatever it has to do in order to alleviate its pain. Incredible. Let's go weiter. Hotzia listim chayavin. So also remember again. So I put my animal in a pen. I did my job, right? So thieves break in and go ahead and take out the animal. So ultimately, both say, so now what's the halacha? The thieves take on responsibility for the animal. So both say, so what this means is like this, right? I put my animal in a pen. Reuven comes along and Reuven steals my sheep. So both say, what's the halacha now? Now my sheep escapes from Reuven and does damage. Who's liable for that? Reuven. Right, so the thief essentially becomes the owner vis-a-vis damages. We'll say Amud Beis. So 56b. So Pshita Kevan Dafkua Kaima Lahu B'Shuse L'Chol Mili. So we'll say that's obvious. We have this concept. I will say I mentioned this yesterday. I mentioned this yesterday, that in halacha, there's something very interesting about a thief, that a thief becomes a quasi-owner. And therefore, again, I will say, once Reuven steals my sheep, and my sheep now is in his domain, under his quote-unquote ownership, then halacha l'maaseh, he's responsible. So the sheep gets out, the sheep does damage, he's responsible for that. So we'll say, what's the chiddush? Lo tzricha dekamula ba'apa. This is very interesting. We'll say, no, what's the case over here? We'll say, the case over here is when Reuven stole my sheep, he never actually picked it up. He never picked it up. Rather, because remember, again, we're assuming that in order to steal something, you have to do one of two things, which is Mashicha, right? Or ultimately, again, Shinui Rishus, right? So either Reuven's picking it up, right? Or he's directing the animal into his property, in which case his chutzner acquires it. So the Gemara wants to just something very interesting. It's not the case over here. But if you can imagine the following scenario, right? My sheep is minding its own business in my pen. A very well-constructed pen, might I say, right? In other words, Shmir Pechusa, I'm doing everything I need to do. Reuven opens the door. What does he do when he opens the door? The sheep's coming out. Now, I will say now what he does is he directs the sheep. He directs the sheep to Shimon's property where it does damage. It eats a row of produce. I will say, but how does he direct the sheep? He doesn't pull it. He doesn't push it. Instead, what does he do? He stands in front of it, preventing it from going in one direction, thereby directing it in a different direction. Look at Rashi. Tekamulu ba'apa, Rashi says, Shalom hashchua. He never actually pulled the sheep or took the Ella, amdu bifaneh l'chol tzad, shelo telech ana va'ana, ela lekama le'echol. So he prevents the sheep essentially from going in this direction, that direction. So it just ends up in the field of Shimon, eating Shimon's produce. If you take your friend's behema and you put it on a different friend's produce and it consumes the produce, you're going to be chayiv. So that's obvious. That's obvious. If I take Reuven's animal and put it in Shimon's field and ultimately it consumes Shimon's produce, of course I'm going to be chayiv for that. Rabbi say the chiddush, the novelty is, even if I don't actively take the animal and place it somewhere, but instead, what do? I direct it with my body by standing in front of it. In other words, it's a little bit of a hands-off direction. So I'm still going to be chayiv. So the Gemara says, to which the Gemara says, the other possibility is that no, is that what Reuven did is so possibility one over here. So remember what's happening. So the Mishnah says, Reuven comes into my property, steals my sheep. The sheep then subsequently does damage. Reuven is liable. So Gemara says, that's obvious. Of course, as the thief, he's now essentially taking ownership and responsibility over the animal. No, what's the chiddush? The chiddush is he didn't take the sheep. Instead, what does he do? He opens the door of my pen, and with his body, he blocks the sheep. And the sheep ends up going into Shimon's property and eats Shimon's produce. So you might have thought that because Reuven himself didn't actively pick up the sheep and place it down, maybe he's not chayiv. Kamash Malon he is. That's the chiddush. Rav Yosef says no. The other possibility is no. Reuven went ahead and opened my pen. He didn't pick up the animal. What did he do? He took a stick and he hit the animal, causing it to go in a particular direction. And therefore he's going to be chayiv. So the Gemara says, "V'listim nami di kishua." The case of the robbers also is that a case ultimately again where no one necessarily lifted up the animal, instead they took a stick and directed the animal to go. Okay, Rabbi says. So the point over here is both the chiddush in these cases is, whereas I thought when reading the Mishnah, the thief comes into my pen, lifts up my sheep and takes it, and therefore again he's acquiring it. Kamash Malon, even in a case where he didn't lift it up, but he directly steered it in a particular direction, either with a stick or even just with his body by blocking its movement. Halacha l'maaseh is going to be chayav. I will say you see a tremendous Musar Haskell in this. So I will say, what's the chap with sheep? You see, sheep, when they hit an obstacle, literally, what do? They just go in a different direction. That's what sheep do. And herein lies the fundamental distinction between sheep and people, right? When a yid hits an obstacle, right? What's my job? Power through it. So say in life, sometimes you hit a wall, and it's easy to say, okay, I tried. What else could I do? There's an obstacle here. It's no longer easy. I'm just simply going to give up. That's sheepkite, right? That's sheep mentality, right? Sheep hit an obstacle, turn a different way. The whole yisod of being an Adam, The power of being an Adam is the ability to overcome obstacles, is the ability to hit brick walls, and yet recognize, inachinami, sometimes in life, sometimes brick walls mean wrong direction. Sometimes they do. And sometimes brick walls mean try harder, scale it, get over it, get around it, but don't allow it to derail your trajectory. The fundamental distinction between sheep and people: sheep hit walls, say, okay, let's go somewhere else. People hit walls, and that is an invitation. Obstacles are an invitation in life to try even harder. Such an incredible yisod. So Gemara goes weiter. Bottom line, don't be a sheep. Masra l'roa nichnas ras. We'll say next case, right? If I have my sheep and I give my sheep over to a shepherd, ultimately, again, the shepherd now takes full responsibility. Shepherd has full responsibility for the sheep. So the Gemara says, Amri, tachtov diman. So now we say that the roa, right, the sheep goes in under, literally tachtov means takes on his responsibility. Whose responsibility are we talking about? So the Gemara says, Amri tachtov diman. Ilim tachtov debal behema, tanina chadazidna. So we'll say, if you mean that when the owner gives the shepherd the animal, the shepherd assumes the responsibility of the owner. We already learned that once. Where do we learn that? If I have an animal and I give my animal over to an unpaid custodian, a borrower or a paid custodian, l'sochar or to a renter, kulan nichnesu tachas habaylim. All of these people assume the responsibility of the owner. In other words, that's pashut, right? I give my animal over to someone, that person takes on my level of responsibility. Ella tachtov de shomer. Rather, we'll say, here's the case. What it means is like this. What it means is, if I give my animal over to a shomer, and the shomer gives it over to a shepherd, ultimately, again, the shepherd takes on the full responsibility of the shomer, and shomer, essentially, the shepherd becomes shomer number 2, right? And shomer number 1 is fully absolved of any responsibility. The shomer kama after leila gamre, and shomer number 1 is fully absolved of complete responsibility. Wow. So therefore, this is what the Gemara is saying. This is a case of shomer shemasar l'shomer, right? Shomer number 1 gives over to shomer number 2. What the Mishnah seems to be saying is that halacha l'maisa, shomer number 2 assumes full responsibility. Shomer number 1 absolved of all responsibility. I says the Gemara, to Rava. Bless you. This would seem to refute the position of Rava. The Amar Rava, shomer shemasar l'shomer chayiv. Rava says, that when shomer 1 gives over to shomer 2, this is obviously without the knowledge of the owner, right? Shomer 1 transfers his responsibility to shomer 2. Shomer 1 is still on the hook. Shomer is still on the hook, right? He's responsible. So this contradicts Rava. Rava says, no. My basru, l'roa. What's the case in the Mishnah? Lebarzilei, the archei deroa lemeis lebarzilei. Both say this is fascinating. This is great. Rava says like this. So Rava says, you're right. In general, I hold shomer shemasar l'shomer, right? I, Shmuel Silber, I'm the proud owner of a sheep. I give my sheep over to a shomer. Right, someone to watch it. That shomer now is vested with complete responsibility. Okay? Now that shomer 1 decides that he wants to give it over to shomer 2. Rava says under normal circumstances, you could give it over to shomer 2, but lamaisa, understand shomer 1, you are still vested with complete responsibility. Rava says there is an exception to this rule. What's the exception? The exception is a shepherd to his shepherding apprentice. Right? So now let's say I give over my animal to the shepherd, and shepherd has Barzilai, but Barzilai is the apprentice, the shepherd apprentice. And the shomer gives it over to his apprentice. And I both say that is common and expected. That's common and expected. When I give over my sheep to the shomer, to the roa, I know that he has an apprentice. It's assumed he's training someone, right? He's always got to have like a replacement, a stand-in. So therefore, it's expected and it's common and accepted that he's going to give it over to his apprentice. What the Mishnah is teaching me is that if the shepherd gives over to his apprentice, the apprentice essentially takes on full responsibility. full responsibility, and therefore halacha l'maaseh, something happens to the sheep, ultimately again it's going to be the apprentice who's going to take on that full responsibility. So we'll stop a bit for today. I'm leaving a bit mid-discussion. So just understand what we're leaving off with. The Mishnah says, I give over my sheep to the roeh, to the shepherd. Shepherd assumes full responsibility. The Gemara says, okay, I guess that's teaching me shomer shemasa l'shomer. Shomer A gives over to shomer B. Shomer B is going to be chayiv. That contradicts Rava. Rava says no, it doesn't. It could be talking about a case of a shepherding apprentice where everyone agrees that that's a normal case. Again, to be continued in Meretz tomorrow, Bosai, Shkoyach.